promoting the free exchange of ideas, questioning the status quo, and having some fun along the way. This is the Are We Idiots Show. Now here are your hosts, Mark Weaver and Rich Kroll.
Hello again, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Are We Idiots Show, episode 20.
It's our 20th anniversary?
20th weekly anniversary.
20th weekly anniversary.
We are your hosts, as always, the aforementioned Mark Weaver and Richard Kroll. Kroll, how you feeling tonight?
I feel strong. It's just such a pleasure to tape this episode live at the Weaver Estate in beautiful downtown Bryn Mawr.
It's Chateau de Weaver.
Chateau de Weaver.
That was good.
Thank you. I had French for 3 years in high school.
I had Spanish. ¿Está Susana en casa? Sí, está con una amiga. ¿Dónde está en la sala? No, en la cocina. That's the entirety of my Spanish that I know.
I'm impressed.
From high school.
I'm about to buy a taco.
All right, folks. Well, we have a great show planned as always. And last week, if you didn't catch last week's episode, go back and listen. It's episode 19. We had a special guest, Scott Brown, on the show, and he started a Facebook page called Cardacy. I won't give any more of it away, but go back and listen to episode 19, Cardacy, and it was great to have a third idiot in the studio with us, wasn't it?
It's always great to have fellow idiots supporting our idiot cause.
And Scott would probably admit he's an idiot. So
He would absolutely admit that.
And also, I wanted to remind listeners, I haven't done this in several weeks, Rich. I have a 5-episode challenge.
Do you really?
I don't know if you know about that.
Explain it to me. Please explain it.
It is my contention that if you are a new listener and you picked out 5 of our most interesting episodes by show title, you can do this on iTunes, Spotify, or Stitcher, and pick out the best 5 that are most interesting to you, give them a listen, and if you do that, you will be hooked for life on the Are We Idiots Show. That's my guarantee.
I think it could go either way. You'll either be hooked for life or go into a self-induced coma.
Or commit Harry Carey, the
One
guy
of the
in
two.
the airplane.
One of the three.
Remember the guy in the airplane? That's funny. All right. This week on the show, we have our Idiot of the Week award. I got some nominees for Kroller here in a second. Then we're going to talk about, and Rich is scratching his head saying, why are we talking about this subject?
I am scratching my head.
And he scratched the remaining hair off of his head.
Completely shiny.
But we're going to talk about why the Federal Reserve has a policy of 2% inflation. And this may classify me as thinking about things that other people don't think about and maybe even shouldn't be thinking about. But I think it's worth bringing up, and we're going to do an episode on it. So there.
Excuse me, I just drifted off for a second.
Hopefully that wasn't all our listeners clicking the stop button. And then we're going to conclude, since it is vacation season, Rich and I are going to share each of our own vacation horror stories. Or I wouldn't really horror stories, but sometimes vacations don't go exactly as planned. And I guess idiot comes in there somewhere. Probably in my case, it's for the vendor that provided the service that will be told about. So we'll talk about that and have a couple laughs about that. Sound good?
Sounds great. So I imagine you're going to challenge the status quo of the economic policy with inflation.
I am going to do that at a very micro level because talking about the Federal Reserve and all its nuances would be, a 4-hour-long show, and we definitely would lose all listeners from there on. So we won't do that. But anyhow, Idiots of the Week. And Rich, my 2 nominees, I have a precious metal theme today. Who would have thought?
I could have never guessed that.
A precious metal theme, but you'll get it when we go through them. Okay, so nominee number 1. An Austrian woman contaminated a sewage treatment plant with high levels of mercury after traveling to India and bringing back a cream and ointment billed as healing ointment that was loaded with toxic heavy metal. Routine monitoring of a sewage treatment plant in Austria revealed alarmingly high levels of mercury earlier this year. Workers then started to trace the source of the mercury, which was almost double the allowable limit. Using a portable mercury detector, I didn't even know there was
There is
such
one of those?
Yes. They eventually traced the contamination back to a private residence 10.5 miles away. The local newspaper reported that the 50-year-old woman resident had been suffering from cancer and had traveled to a wellness center in India and brought back 22 pounds of the remedy. The woman's apartment also had an Indian shrine set up within. The paper reported that she's now also suffering from serious mercury poisoning.
Surprise.
Who would have thought, right?
What, does she take a bath in it?
For our listeners, mercury is an extremely toxic metal that can cause damage to the brain, kidneys, and lungs, and it can be absorbed through the skin, through vapor, or through ingestion. So, Chinese medicine or Asian medicine is not always even though they've been around for thousands of years, ingesting mercury or bathing in mercury, probably not a good idea.
I guess the theory is fighting something highly toxic with something highly toxic could equal it out.
Or kill you sooner.
Or kill you sooner. You know what's funny and actually scary? When we were kids, do you remember mercury thermometers?
Oh, yeah. And they would break.
Well, we used to break them open on purpose.
Yeah.
And then mercury is a very bizarre substance. It would ball up
Right.
in these, and not just in like little teardrops or like water droplets.
Right.
They would ball up in these little, almost like pearl-sized balls.
Right, yeah. I remember
and
that.
you could, and we
You could
would
play
touch
with them.
them and play with them.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And then we went up and ate lead paint off our windowsill.
Right after that.
All right, so that's nominee number one. And nominee number two, which I think you're going to choose. But
How is mercury a precious metal?
Well, okay. It's not a
It's
precious.
a metal.
It's a metal.
Liquid metal.
Okay, liquid metal. All right, so nominee number two. And you and I are both Christians, Rich, and there's nothing I hate more than Christians that give Christians a bad name. And this guy was
This is right there?
Right here. Televangelist, author, and convicted felon Jim Bakker is back with another product he says cures, quote, all venereal disease
All.
and is made up of silver. Quote, did you know the one thing we never talk about, Jim says? Really, it's one of the few gels and products that cures or gets rid of all venereal diseases, Baker claims. The product is available in liquid and gel form in various bundles, ranging from $25 for 4 ounces, $40 for a 16-ounce bottle, and the liquid version, $175 and $250 respectively. For a case, 1 dozen of each version. So basically, he's giving volume discounts, like any good marketer would.
Of course. Do you drink it or do you wipe it on yourself?
It doesn't say. The contents of you ingest it, you drink it. The contents of what's inside the silver solution aren't explicitly revealed, conveniently enough. This is the scandal-ridden churchgoer's latest endeavor to make money. In February, Jim came out with offers for fuel-less generators, doomsday guidebooks, and buckets of food that he promised would last 30 days and said were necessary to prepare, as he says, the end of the world is approaching.
Wait, the Doomsday Guidebook is not necessary?
Now, it is necessary to
Well,
prepare.
I know, 'cause I bought several of them.
How much were they? $400?
Well, 400 for the set,
Yeah.
but
Well, you had to live in the doomsday.
it's like an encyclopedia. I was getting one a month for 2 years.
According to public records, he has an IRS tax lien against him and his former wife, Tammy Faye Baker. May she rest in peace. She died in 2007. And he owes an amount of $5.5 million.
That's all?
That's all. So he's got to sell something. It might as well be cures for venereal diseases.
So this universal medical miracle will cure everything from scabies to HIV?
That's it. And everything else.
Call
It's silver.
Merck. No, call J&J or call GSK, somebody.
Oh man!
All right,
so,
so-
that's your those are your nominees there, Richie.
All right, so we have one metal, one precious metal. The first gal, look, if I'm dying of something or I got some disease, I'm probably going to do something wacky too, like drink a mixture of, eye of newt and, boar testicles, whatever. So I can see people
And
trying.
you already said in the past episode we will be smoking marijuana at that point.
Oh, in a heartbeat. So, I feel sorry for people that are having illnesses and doing stupid stuff to try to cure them. So she gets a slight pass. But Jim, my man Jim, I mean, come on.
Yeah, he's given all Christians a bad name. He's been doing it for 25 years.
This is an idiot for multiple reasons, not just this. So I might even send $2 to his
Jim?
church.
Well, he needs the money. And for our younger listeners, Jim Baker was caught with a secretary. Actually, he was paying her off from an affair when he was supposed to be this moralistic leader. Yeah, he was a good guy. Not.
I remember when he went live, public crying.
Well, Jimmy Swaggart too.
Yeah.
I have sinned
I have
against you,
sinned.
Father. Yeah, I mean,
God help us.
I'm laughing, but they really are an embarrassment to normal Christians. So, all right, so Jim Baker, money's coming on your way. All right, so now, and again, I don't know how this will go, Rich, and you'll probably be making fun of me all the way throughout this.
I expect to, yes.
This diatribe. But I just like to, I like to bring up things that people aren't thinking about. And everyone's heard of the Fed. They've probably heard of the Federal Reserve Chairman. It's a very powerful position. The Federal Reserve System, for some background, it was started in 2000, in 1913, and the purpose was to try to centralize power to avoid catastrophic exogenous events and bank runs. Exogenous, yeah.
How do you even is that a word?
Yeah. Like outlier events, extremes.
There's no way you know how to spell that.
Exogenous, yeah. I could try to figure that out, but
See, I'm learning more than just economics today.
But anyhow, it was it basically was to control the monetary system through a centralized power. The irony is that this country's two worst financial crises, the Great Depression and then the recession in 2008, were both when the Fed existed, right? So the whole purpose of them existing was to not have these great outlier events. They were supposed to smooth out the edges and manage things. And of course, our two worst things were when they were managing things. So let's put that aside. And by the way, as a kind of a tangent, this is why a lot of libertarians believe and are hopeful about cryptocurrencies, so that someday an open source, worldwide, not controlled by any state currency could potentially be the world currency and not controlled by a government. But then I won't go into a tangent like that. But that's why a lot of libertarians are hopeful about cryptocurrencies. So anyhow, the
But
Fed.
there's dangers to cryptocurrencies. Well, we might have to do an episode on cryptocurrency.
Yeah, I mean, right now, it's real early days, and you can't even draw any conclusions yet. But the technology, the blockchain technology, definitely is open source and not controlled by anyone. And if you can somehow get worldwide acceptance, it would be great. Anyhow, not to digress too much. But the Fed has a dual mandate, and it's to maximize employment. And really, the secondary mandate is the one I wanted to talk about. And it really kind of controls the first mandate, which is to stabilize prices. And they try to do that, I should say, by controlling interest rates, right? And they're historically horrible at predicting what the economy's doing, what GDP's doing. And they've missed almost every indicator of every recession or pullback. They've missed all kinds of cues to the financial crisis that Greenspan and Bernanke were saying what good shape the housing market was in before the crisis. So they're notoriously bad at managing this, and yet we see them as this infallible entity. So the first thing I want to talk about is, when they try to stabilize pricing, it benefits, or I should say stabilize pricing, it benefits the political class, right? And the
political class being who?
The people in charge, right? So the political class love it because it helps, because if they want 2% inflation, that's their stated goal, is they want to try to have the economy grow at 2% each year. And this is a policy. They've been saying it for years, and this is what they're mapping towards, right? And if the economy is growing just a little bit, it helps, because the perception is that we're making progress, right? And if you think about it, wages are increasing a little bit. If people have an expectation that the economy is growing, that means they want to buy now and things will go up in price. And that is why elected leaders, because it produces like a positive vibe, right? That things are getting better, things are growing, right? As opposed to deflation.
Yes, I would think most people think that.
Right. But the bad side of that is, and we'll talk about why deflation, I think, is a good thing, even though it's perceived as a bad thing by most Fed watchers. The other thing, and this is what I hinted at last week, it kind of melts away government debt, and that's another reason why governments like it, because governments spend too much, and then inflation kind of chips away and melts away debt. So let me give you an example. If you have a 10% inflation, so prices and wages are rising at 10%, the nominal tax revenue will increase as well. And if 10% inflation, only thing that happens is you're no better off because your wages went up, but prices went up, and consumers are no better off. But because government gets a percentage of tax revenue, they're better off. So the government government promotes inflation, and the value of the money comes down over time, and that actually helps them decrease the deficit. The second thing is, if the government sells bonds, that's how it issues debt, and if the inflation means that they're repaying bondholders, it requires a smaller percentage of government total tax revenue, so it's easier for the government to pay it back. So I know that got really wonky and everything, but the bottom line is the government has a policy of promoting price increases for their own benefit, for the benefit of the people that are in charge to get reelected, and I'm going to give you examples of why that's the wrong policy. Any comments about all that before we?
Well, holy cow. I didn't realize I was sitting here with a young Alexander Hamilton or a young Ralph Nader. I feel like I'm back at St. Joe's University snoring in the back of the room. So it is fascinating on one hand, and it's boring as hell on the other. I just got a call on my cell phone from the National Suicide Hotline.
For some reason, joking about that.
It's spiked up 20% during this coincidental 5 minutes.
Both our listeners are
both our listeners are on the top of somebody's roof. So, okay, yeah, I don't think people realize this. I would never even personally consider deflation being a good thing. Inflation, the word inflation has a negative connotation. So I do think most people, when they hear inflation, it's like, oh, something's rising. That's not good for us. But when people think, well, if my wages are going up and the economy's growing, that's a good thing. So this is definitely a misunderstood area in life that most people do not understand.
The true definition of inflation is an increase in the money supply, right? But that has morphed into just general prices increasing, right? Most people, when they say inflation, they assume like something like the CPI. The Fed uses a thing called
What's the CPI?
CPI, Consumer Price Index.
Got it. I knew that one.
And the Fed they don't use the CPI. The Fed uses a thing called a PCE, Personal Consumption Expenditures. That's what the Fed uses to judge inflation.
Not primal continuous ecstasy? I'm sorry, that's something else.
But they're really bad at it. But basically, it's a basket of things that gets reported, and it's highly inaccurate. And it's very regionalized, and it doesn't include things that most people think as inflationary. So that's that. But here's where I want to drill down, because you made a comment earlier that says I wouldn't think that deflation would be good. Well, I'm here to say, and a lot of Austrian economic people think deflation is good, and it's quite normal. Let me give you some examples. Okay. So first of all, why is the Fed afraid of deflation? And this is where most people come down. I'll read it to you. Once a consumer's spending begins to decelerate, it has ripple effects on the corporate sector, which begins deferring or slashing capital expenditures, spending on property, building equipment, new projects and investments. Corporations may begin downsizing workers in order to maintain profitability. This creates a vicious cycle with corporate layoffs imperiling consumer spending, which in turn leads to more layoffs and rising unemployment. Such contraction in consumer and corporate spending can trigger a recession, and in worst-case scenarios, a full-blown depression. So that's why...
A proverbial waterfall or domino effect.
Right, and that's why central banks all around the world think deflation is the worst thing in the world, and they do everything to avoid it. And my point is...
But you're going to tell us why it's actually the opposite.
It's not exactly the opposite, but I guess just logically... If deflation is the worst thing that can possibly happen, you'd think the inverse of that would be a great thing. But no, high inflation is also not good, right? So that's why they've settled on this. Just a little bit of inflation is good because the perception is that the populace, the plebes, will be led along that everything's going just good enough, but not too well, right?
It's like medicine. If you take not enough, it doesn't help you. If you take too much, it kills you.
Exactly.
I'm doing pretty good with this right now.
You're doing really good. It's almost like you knew what I was talking about.
Almost. I had no idea, by the way. That's for sure.
But anyhow, so pure inflation is really the increase in the money supply, but people have maintained that it's really overall prices. But here's where I'll give you an example of why deflation works and why deflation really is good. So what happens in a normal market that most people have witnessed in our lifetime? So calculators. When calculators first came out, they were $1,200, right? They were a new technology. There was very few suppliers of them, and it was cutting edge. They were $1,200. Now what's a calculator? $5? I mean, you can go anywhere and get a calculator that does all kinds of functions, $5. You can go gaming systems. Remember gaming systems when they first came out? They were fiercely expensive. Now you can get they're like microcomputers now for $150.
Moore's Law,
computers, right? Everything. TVs. You were just saying that about massive TVs. You can get a better one in 2 years, which much better features, better picture for the same price or less, right?
Mike French, famous lacrosse player, partner at PwC, bought the first 50-inch plasma I'd ever seen about 20 years ago. It was $10,000.
Right.
You can now get a 50-inch TV for like $500.
Probably less.
$300.
Yeah.
Right.
So audio equipment, laser eye treatments. Remember the Kramer eye surgery? Because that's an open market. There's no insurance taken. It's a free market, and those more and more doctors have gotten that skill, and those prices have come down. Cosmetic surgery, Botox used to be $20,000 for treatments. Only the people in Hollywood got them. Now you can get them for $300 at your local dermatologist.
I may have to stop in there.
Mobile phones, right? Mobile phones. I had a bag phone. It probably cost $700-800 when they first came out. Now you can get ones for less than that, or at least they stay the same price and have a lot more features. All kinds of software. You and I are in the software business. Now you can go into space. You got Jeff Bezos. Who is it? Elon Musk, Richard Branson, all going to take consumers to space for $100,000, where you could, you had to pay $100 million, 30 years ago.
Can't we just smoke marijuana to go into space?
You could probably do that. My point is that a deflationary market is normal. It's normal because supply and demand, economics. When there's brand new product, there's limited supply. It costs a lot. As technology increase and productivity increase, the price comes down. So what's wrong with the deflationary market where products get cheaper as they get better?
Ferris Bueller. So let me, father of our country, anyone. So I'm learning. I feel like I'm in class. So a light bulb just went off. So if I spend less money on consumer goods,
right,
I now have more disposable income to save and invest,
right,
and use for the future.
Right. And we talked about this with when the government was propping up the housing market by subsidizing mortgages and incentivizing home ownership and giving tax breaks. Why are they propping up the cost of things? If everyone's costs came down, we'd all have more money. And maybe wages would come down too, by the way. But maybe that would free up people to start more businesses. So the central theme is that we're being manipulated and controlled by the political class and by centralized power. It's a common theme with me. And the Fed is just but another example. And I have a quote from a former Fed chairman to close this segment. But any comments before I do that?
Well, I usually show up to these things happy and calm, and I leave here furious and agitated.
Thank you, world.
Thank you, world, as I learn more and more how we're being screwed by our government that we so.
They're a monopoly. They're a monopoly on money. You know that a lot of governments used to have a lot of countries used to have a national airline, right? Remember that,
Yep.
like Air Egypt and British
Almost all of
Airways, Air France. Everyone had a national airline that was subsidized by the government. Well, no one even thinks about that anymore. It's all decentralized and have free market competition. Well, wouldn't it be great if money was the same thing? Why do we have to have money controlled by a particular country?
So, in 3 sentences or less, so you don't continue to kill our listeners, explain what the 2% policy, how it impacts us negatively. I mean, you kind of did that, but
No, it's a good.
Give me the summary where the takeaway.
Okay, the takeaway is, and I'm going to use a quote from Paul Volcker. So when you and I were young, in the 70s, there was rampant inflation in the U.S., and Paul Volcker raised interest rates astronomically to try to fight it. But this is a quote from him. Paul Volcker says this about deflation. Quote, "The idea that when people see prices falling, they will stop buying those cheaper goods or cheaper food does not make much sense to me. And aiming for 2% inflation every year means that after a decade, prices are more than 25% higher and the price level doubles every generation. That is not price stability, which is one of the Fed's mandate, price stability. Yet they call it price stability. I just do not understand central banks wanting a little inflation." So Paul Volcker is exactly right. He was the best Fed chairman by far in my lifetime. And he's exactly right. The Fed should not be promoting an inflationary policy where over time they're just devaluing everyone's money. And so that's the long-term effect of this is, I think since the Federal Reserve System started in 1913, the dollar is worth 95% less than it was. And the dollar is not pegged, and now we're getting off the deep end. The dollar is not pegged to anything. It used to be pegged to gold, and Nixon took us off the gold standard in the 70s, and there's nothing pegged to the dollar. So it's just the faith of the U.S. government, which is baloney. So
Did you just curse?
baloney, yeah, baloney.
So listen, I think the impact of this show today will help you get a few more people to register as libertarians.
That's my hope. We're going to do a show on libertarianism. That's my dream. That someday you'll let me do that, and then you can poke holes in me. We'll talk about libertarian principles at a broader.
I will let you do that. I promise.
So we're going to end the show with a little fun segment on vacations that have not gone as planned. As we're in vacation season, and we're going to be taking some vacation time here in a week or so. My story is, and I'll tell it quickly, and then Kroller will tell his. So early on in my sales days, there was I worked for a company that had incentive trips, and we won several incentive trips, but one of them was to Canada, and we went to Quebec City.
The Great White North.
We went to Quebec City, and then we went to Montreal. And these are sales incentive trips, but it was a vacation, and essentially they wine and dine you, treat you real nice, put us up in a real big hotel, and they were going to take us out to the French Quarter of Montreal on a Saturday night. We got all dressed up, and for each couple, my wife and I were there, for each couple, they had horse-drawn carriages come pick us up at the hotel.
That sounds beautiful.
Yeah, they're going to take us to it. So it's raining a little bit, and there was a little cover over. It was very romantic, and so we pull up. The horse pulls up to pick us up, and they say, "I want to introduce you to your driver, Jacques." And the horse's name is Piggy. Piggy. So we say, "Hi, Piggy. Hi, Jacques." Whatever. We get in, we start going. And Piggy, from the very beginning, Piggy doesn't look
off.
It doesn't look quite right. Yeah. And Piggy's a little antsy and kind of trying to jostle around in the stirrups, and Jock's having a little trouble with Piggy. So we're a little bit concerned, but we're like, oh, let's try to enjoy the moment. Well, all of a sudden, Piggy starts to run. Piggy gets spooked and just starts bolting through the streets of Montreal.
So you're in a live steeplechase at this point.
We are, and Jock is saying, "Yo, Piggy, whoa, Piggy, whoa, Piggy," and he can't control Piggy, and we're flying. You know, it probably wasn't as fast as it seemed, but we're going whatever a horse can run, towing a carriage.
But
probably
you're not on an open field,
no,
right?
no,
So-
we're in the streets of Montreal. So we go for maybe 3 or 4 blocks like this and barreling, and he can't control, and the horse tries to go real close to a row of parked cars, and bam, the right side of the carriage hits this parked car, drives the parked car up onto the sidewalk. The wheel comes off on the right side. We go over sideways on our left side. The driver goes flying out into the street. By the way, he lands and breaks his arm. But Mary Ellen was on the right side, and I was on the left. She kind of lands on me, and I'm like being drug along the ground, and the horse is still dragging the carriage when it's on its side. And then finally, it kind of breaks free. And, we were hurt, but not really hurt.
This wasn't part of the trip.
This was an adventure
Was not a
experience.
planned part of the trip.
But I, broke my watch, ruined my suit, ruined my shoes. We were a little banged up, but otherwise we're okay. The driver actually was hurt pretty bad. But yeah, so they should check their horses before they
nuts.
before they put them in that type of environment.
That's really nuts. You guys could have sued.
We could have sued, but we were 26 years old, and it was in Canada, and they were barely wanting to pay for my ripped suit. So,
Wow.
Anyhow,
Yeah, that's a bad trip. So, a couple of years ago, I was invited to my good friend Pat Weldy's son, Pat Weldy Jr.'s wedding up in Cape Cod, and one of my good friends, forever the last 50 years, Gary Yagmorian Yags. Let's carpool. So Gary drove myself and my wife Jill. And I knew how to get to Cape Cod, so I had the route mapped out. But one thing we didn't do at 6 a.m. was check KYW. You normally in our world around Philly, you always put on 1060
this
KYW.
was before Waze, obviously.
And, before Waze. Well, no, well, it was still GPS, but even with GPS,
Right.
we just
You
used
don't
to
know traffic.
put the news on. It gives you the sports, weather, and then traffic every couple of minutes or whatever. For some reason, we don't do it. And literally 20 minutes into the trip on the PA Turnpike, there is a truck fire. So some 18-wheeler, I don't know what the heck happened, caught on fire. And the way we were situated,
You can't get off.
we can't get off.
Right.
We're in between exits. We sat there. And the other funny thing is that the trip started out really happy because I estimate 7.5 hour trip. Not a big deal. Gary and I are going to tell childhood stories. Jill's going to laugh. Jill can sleep in the back.
It's all good.
All good.
Road trip.
So we got stuck for 3 hours after just 20 minutes into the trip.
Which brings up the bathroom question.
Yeah,
Not for
luckily-
you, but for Jill, maybe.
I don't, she held it in. I'm pretty good at holding it in. So finally we get moving. But this thing's backed up for eons.
Right.
So we get off as soon as we can off the PA Turnpike, and we take an alternative route. We take this back way to get to the Garden State Parkway, which we ultimately wanted to get to. So now we're in a good mood again.
Yeah.
All right, we averted Rich. Rich is smart. We literally. So now we're about an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours further down the line. Now maybe not even that far, and we see this huge smoke billowing
On the horizon.
in the horizon, about 2 to 3 miles ahead. And we all turn to each other and go,
This can't happen again.
"No effing way! It's impossible." It's statistically, what are the odds of getting stuck behind one car fire? Maybe 1 in 1,000. Honest to John,
Another truck fire.
another truck fire or car event on the Garden State Parkway. We got stuck for another 2.5 hours.
Yeah. I would probably would have turned around and gone home at that point. I'm like, this trip's not worth it. But you had to go, right?
I was ready to shove a meat thermometer in my ear just to soothe the pain. We started shouting at each other. It's 14 hours later.
it had to be someone's fault.
Well, I got blamed for not listening to KYW and mapping out because we could have went several different ways, but that trip got off to such a bad start. I don't know that Jill fully recovered. We had a good time at the wedding. It was a great wedding, beautiful ceremony, beautiful everything, but we were a little off, for the next 3 days.
That's a great story. And hey, listeners, as we approach vacation season, send us your worst vacation story. Maybe we'll repeat it on the air. If you have a funny one like that, we'd love to tell it. We could even keep you anonymous if you prefer that. But if you have a funny vacation story in this time of vacations, send it to us, suggestions@areweidiots.com, and we'll tell it on air. That might be fun. There's probably some good ones. Oh, there we are. As always, please remember, if what you see or hear sounds idiotic, then we're just the guys to help you sort it out. See you all next week. Take care.
Thank you for listening to the Are We Idiots Show. Please subscribe on iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher so you can enjoy all episodes.